Well, the two TVs I'll be comparing today is the LG G5 and the Bravia 8 Mark II. These are both flagship OLED TVs, both using two different technologies. The Bravia 8 Mark II is going to have a QD OLED using the latest panel, and the LG G5 is going to be a primary RGB tandem OLED. Now, to kind of prepare you for what you're about to see is this is going to be a video that is really catered to everyone. It's not just going to be catered to beginners or people that don't know a lot about these TVs. It's also going to be catered towards enthusiasts as well. So I'm going to have something for everybody in this video, scene by scene analysis, as well as some basics to help you understand the TVs a little bit better. So let's start with some things that you need to know about the LG G5 and the Bravia 8 Mark II. So the LG G5 is going to have a wall mount in the box itself for pretty much all the sizes. Now, there is going to be variants in other countries with a stand in the box. Now, the Bravia 8 Mark II does come with the stand in the box, but this stand is definitely going to be really something you have to plan for if you have a longer table or a longer entertainment stand, because it's only on the end of the TV, which can make the actual setup of the TV sort of troublesome if you don't have a table that is long enough to fit this TV. Another thing you'll want to know is that the LG G5 is available in 6 different sizes. The size that I was looking at used the primary RGB tandem OLED, and that's going to be for 55, 65, and 77 inches, as well as 83. Now, going over to the other side of the coin, you have the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II, which is only going to be available in 55 inches and 65 inches. So if you want something bigger than that, you're going to have to go with a different model. Another thing that is really useful to know is that the LG G5 is going to have a 5-year panel warranty included with the purchase of this TV that is going to be backed by LG. In terms of differences with the notable specs and the features you really need to know about, one of the things that will stick out when you're looking at these two TVs is the gaming capability. So 4 HDMI 2.1 ports on the LG G5, all capable of 165 Hz VRR gaming if you have a PC that is compatible. Now, on the other hand, the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II is only going to have two HDMI 2.1 ports, one of which is shared with the ERC port. And let me be clear, you do get 4 ports total, but only 2 of them are 120 Hz 4K. But that's enough about gaming for now. We'll talk more about it a little later in the video. This next difference has to do with audio. Now, I remember hearing about this briefly, but I kind of forgot about it, and I was playing a 4K Blu-ray, and all of a sudden I didn't have audio on my LG TV, but I had audio on my Sony TV. I was running it through a splitter, and it said no audio supported for the LG, and I didn't know what was going on, and it turns out the track was DTS, and that's because the LG doesn't support DTS, but the Sony does. So that would be another difference that you'll have to keep in mind if DTS matters to you. Okay, so enough about the audio. Now let's talk about picture quality, but first I do want to be transparent with you guys and let you know that Sony sent me over this TV, and the LG I had to buy myself. And with these TVs, that's usually the case of how it goes. If I get lucky, I might be able to get a review sample or one sent to me to hold on for a while, but those cases are definitely rare. So when I'm not able to get any TV from a manufacturer, then I have to go out and buy it myself. And if you guys want to help support the channel to help me get even more TVs in the future and let us do more comparisons than we ever did before, the best way that you could do so is by buying your next TV on one of the affiliate links in the description. It helps out so much. Thank you guys so much for your support. Now let's get on with the rest of the video. All right, now let's talk about picture quality, and we're going to first start with image processing. Now, when I compared OLED TVs from these two brands in the past, my takeaway has always been that Sony was the clearer, sharper TV of the two, and that has been a pretty consistent thing all the way up until the LG G4's release. That's when it changed a little bit. The LG G4 definitely caught up a little bit with the picture processing that it implemented in the LG G4. A lot of cases, it was trying to do what Sony was doing, but it tried to do it more aggressively. And at times, they kind of achieved that with certain looks and certain ways that you would see the image last year. This year, it feels like they've doubled down on that, and some negative effects are definitely present with the LG G5 in mind with that. One thing you'll have to know about the Sony is that it's not just gonna be it's sharpening the image. It is doing some advanced processing that is going to do scene by scene analysis of what's going on in the picture itself and it only chooses to enhance certain objects in the image itself. So it's not the whole entire image. It's not a global thing that just gets applied. It's a good algorithm, but it's not perfect. Sometimes you can run into image artifacts with this processing, but it is cleaner than most processing that I've seen on any other TV. With the G4 in mind last year, that did a lot of what Sony was doing with the XR processor. It did seem like it was closer than ever with that in mind. So it seems like the G5 took that, and I don't know if this was from internal feedback or what, but it just seems like they had this strategy in mind last year and they just said, let's crank it up even more. And the result of that seems to be an over processed look at times. And that's the best way that I could describe it. It can bring out some of the worst in terms of what's going on in the image. So, in some darker scenes, I've noticed that whenever I look into the shadow detail that is there when I'm looking at the G5, I'm noticing a little bit more noise in the image than I usually get, say, with the G4. I don't remember having the same complaint. And what's interesting is that the G5 does crush a little bit of the black, which I'm going to talk about later. But if I raise up the black, I'm just going to see more of the downsides to this image processing. It's kind of like a pick your poison situation once again with LG, where it's like you're either going to get one bad side of the image or you're going to mask it with something else, but in turn create a new problem. Which is going to bring me to my next thing, which is also kind of brought out even more by the processing, and that is the dithering that the LG G5 performs. And this is going to be distracting if you're sitting closer to the TV in monitor distance. And this is something that at normal viewing watching distances I didn't pick up on too often. So I think for the most part, you should be fine at regular viewing distances. I've already seen so many complaints on this when it comes down to other viewers and other users of this TV. And this is something that definitely is a hot topic right now. A lot of people do not like this. And this is something we have seen before on other OLED TVs. It's just more noticeable now because of what they're doing with the processing. Now, on the topic of image quality and image artifacts that I'm noticing, yeah, I noticed some on both TVs when it comes down to color banding. And it's definitely going to be a little worse on the LG with this in mind, especially in the game mode. But the Sony surprisingly does have some color banding that creeps up from time to time as well. These posterization issues can also make themselves known in some darker content, and this is something that I noticed on both TVs. But yeah, it was kind of surprising because Sony usually is pretty clean in this area. All right, so let's move into color. Color and color brightness when it comes down to QD-OLED versus WOLED has always been a thing that we've talked about in the past where QD-OLED has a clear advantage. And yes, we are seeing that with this battle as well. But the LG G5 has gotten closer than I've ever seen LG get with the color and the color brightness. Now, one negative that I noticed with my Sony out of the box was going to be inside of skin tones. There's definitely a red push going on, and you can see this not only in skin tones, but even on walls and on curtains, things that are light or neutral. And I just want to remind you guys, when you are listening to me evaluate this kind of thing, I am not a calibrator, and I don't have a reference monitor to tell you what the actual image should look like. This is just going to be my opinion between the two next to each other, the differences that I observe out of the box. That's really all you're getting from me. So you have to understand that there are real professionals out there that you can get advice from that are very helpful in the community, but there's also going to be pretenders who pretend like they are something that they are not, and they try to lead you astray, making you think that they're a professional calibrator when they're nothing more than a fake guru that's just trying to sell you on some miracle water. So you have to be careful in who you listen to. That's why I want to be fully transparent with you guys and let you know that I am not a professional calibrator and I don't play one on TV. But man, I do put countless hours into this, making sure that I can give you the best presentation possible, talking to as many people as I can that I can trust that do this professionally, calibrators and people that are looking at video just like me every day. I felt like that needed to be said so that you can understand me a little bit better and understand how I do these presentations a little bit better. All right, now let's talk about brightness. In terms of brightness, like overall peak brightness, the G5 is the brighter TV. So if you're feeding it the right content that's able to hit these high brightness levels, it's going to be brighter than the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II. But for the most part, in real content, for regular scenes, across the board, it is going to appear that they're going to trade blows a lot. And I mean it. Like, they're so close in brightness on most scenes. And if you want to brute strength the actual HDR brightness out of the TVs using dynamic tone mapping on for the LG or brightness preferred for the Sony, the Sony can often get almost as bright, so it does really show its strength in what it is going to perform. So I do think that the Sony just looks better than what the numbers say in terms of peak brightness. This is why I don't pay attention to windowed measurements. I think that they're just not going to be very helpful to most people, as it doesn't really reflect real content. However, if you're talking about SDR brightness, the G5 is going to deliver a more consistent presentation of SDR peak brightness, especially if you're one to crank up the peak brightness because you need it for a brighter room. Well, then the G5 is going to perform better than that. I found that when I was watching prolonged viewing sessions that the LG G5 rarely wanted to dim down the static logos that were on the screen if you have the logo luminance reduction set too low. Now, the Sony, on the other hand, doesn't have this feature, and it's not even selectable as an option. So by default, it's going to protect itself a lot faster and going to dim the screen down if you are going to blast it at high brightness levels. However, I do want to say that if you're able to watch your SDR in a controlled lighting environment and you keep it to the recommended peak brightness levels, you're probably never going to run into dimming issues with either of these TVs. With HDR, on the other hand, when it comes down to dimming in regular content, I didn't really notice too much dimming in regular content from both of these TVs. And when it came down to gaming, I didn't notice any dimming from the Sony in HDR, but I did notice some from the G5 in HDR. Okay, now let's talk about something they definitely do differently, and that is going to be shadow detail. Another aspect of image quality that I like to get into a little bit more on this channel once I have an opportunity to do so, but what I've observed from the shadow detail is that there is definitely going to be a difference in how they are going to, say, present it to you. And I say it that way because I checked the low dynamic range pattern on Spears and Munsell, and it appeared to me that that pattern told me that both of them should be fine for the most part. But in real content, I get a completely different look. So the Sony does seem to be bumping up the shadows a little bit, and it seems like the G5 is crushing the shadows a little bit. And this is definitely something you can see in some of the images I'm going to show you right now. This is from real content, Netflix shows, and movies. And I think that this is something that is a distracting thing for me on the G5. I am somebody who prefers a little bit of shadow detail, especially if it's in the actual content itself. Now, I have no way of telling you if it is or not because I don't have a reference monitor, but I have to imagine that this is not the way it's supposed to be on the G5. There are times where I just feel like crucial details are crushed within the image itself. And even sometimes I'll notice that skin tones are rendered almost pale when it comes down to the G5. Now, this is something that I did notice with the G5, but I didn't see it on the Z95B. So this tells me it's a problem with the G5 and not the panel itself. I'll show you more examples of this when I go into my 4-way comparison of all the flagship OLED TVs. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. All right, now let's move on to gaming. So I'm not going to have a full gaming breakdown in this side-by-side comparison. It's just way too complicated to explain the differences because gaming is definitely more complicated with both of these TVs in mind. The HGIG guidelines don't really work for the Sony, so this is something where you're not going to have access to a mode like that, but the Sony somehow makes it work, and you can definitely get good HDR out of it. It's really just going to be a preference thing at the end of the day. There's no wrong or right answer or accurate way to do tone mapping. It just is something you either like or you don't. And I've seen that the Sony definitely will have an advantage when you're driving a high color brightness game on one of these TVs. Again, I'll have a full gaming breakdown of these two TVs in a future video, but that's all I really have to say about gaming. I think the differences are pretty unique, and they're both going to be pretty good gaming TVs for the most part. There's not really any huge negatives other than the ports on the Sony and the actual refresh rate capabilities of the Sony as well, if you are a PC gamer, which we have talked about already. Stepping away from gaming, I do want to say that I didn't check out Dolby Vision in this video, but I'll have a separate separate video going over the Dolby Vision of the Z95B, the G5, and the Bravia 8 Mark II as I do a three-way comparison in Dolby Vision and talk about the downsides and the plus sides of Dolby Vision. I'm already done filming that, and spoiler alert, there's not a lot of plus sides. Now, I think this video is long enough. I can only really go into certain topics. There's probably a lot of questions you guys have, and I might not have answered those questions for you. So if you have those questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my ability. But I want to hear from you guys. Which one are you going to buy, and did your mind change with this comparison? Let me know in the comments below. If you guys want to watch another side-by-side comparison that I did, definitely check it out right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.